Hi, I'm Olivia, and my channel is going to cover the strange and unusual. And what I'm covering now is the exorcism of Roland Doe, which was so horrifying it inspired the 1973 movie The Exorcist, which is a horror classic all on its own, but it's made so much more terrifying when you realize it's based off real-life events. And the movie did take some liberties, nobody's head turned around in this story, but it's pretty scary when you realize it was based largely on an unofficial journal written by some of the priests who witnessed one of the most horrifying exorcisms of all time. Roland Doe is not the boy's real name. That was just the way it was documented to protect his identity, because at the time of these events, he was only 14 years old. And by all accounts, he was a normal boy. He grew up in a German Lutheran household. He lived with his family in Cottage City, Maryland in the 1940s. But he was an only child and he didn't have a lot of friends. And so he relied on the adults in his life as playmates. And he was particularly fond of one aunt named Harriet, who was a spiritualist. And what that means is that she believed that after death we become spirits, and the spirits can communicate with the living. Not only that, the spirits want to communicate with the living. So of course, she introduced him to a Ouija board, and he played it all the time, which is a bad idea because a Ouija board communicates with spirits, but many believe you can't control what you're communicating with. Meaning when you open up a portal to the other side, you might think you're talking to a dead relative, but you could be talking to the devil. So when you're playing with a Ouija board, the evil you're inviting could be coming straight into your house or straight into yourself. Things didn't get strange until that aunt died suddenly in January of 1949, and Roland didn't take her death well. He started to try and communicate with her spirit through the Ouija board, and that's when the family started to notice strange things happening around the house. At first, it was just the sound of water, but it gradually grew and grew until it was the sound of banging and footsteps running through the house. But when they checked, nobody was there. And then it was the sound of scratching on their walls and floors. But when they ripped up the floorboards expecting to find rats, again, there was nothing. And then water started leaking from the walls without a source. And so they assumed that it was the dead aunt trying to communicate. But that didn't explain why when Roland was in the room, objects would levitate and fly across the room, and furniture started to move, like his bed, which would violently shake. And all of these activities seemed centered around the boy, whose behavior was also changing. He became violent and was prone to outbursts and would just scream as though he was in agony, although there was nothing wrong with him. And then marks started to appear all across his body as though he was being touched by an invisible force. The family tried everything. They consulted doctors and psychiatrists, but they didn't have any answers for what was wrong with Roland. Their Lutheran minister suggested that he could be a victim of demonic possession, but he didn't have any way to help and suggested that they go to the local Catholic priest. So in the family's desperation to save their son, they went to Father Edward Hughes, who agreed to do Roland's first exorcism. And exorcisms are performed across many religions, with the basic idea is that the exorcist will cast out the devil, demons, or whatever supernatural beings that have taken up residency inside the possessed person. However, their practice had been in decline for years, and by the early 20th century in America, it would have been very rare to perform an exorcism. But that didn't stop the priest from starting Roland's exorcism in late February of 1949 at the Georgetown University Hospital. Roland was restrained to his bed, but in a violent fit of rage, he broke one of his hands free, dug into the mattress, pulled out a spring, and started violently beating the priest with it. That's when the priest realized this level of evil was beyond his capabilities and the exorcism was halted. That's also when the family began to lose hope. They had no idea where to turn until a few days later, when red scratches began to appear on Roland's body, and they noticed that one of them looked like they spelled out Louis, which the family took as a sign to mean St. Louis, which is where Roland's mother had relatives living. And in March, they moved there. And it almost immediately seemed like the right decision when a relative put them in contact with the Jesuits at St. Louis University, which led them to Father Halloran, Bodern, and Bishop, who would agree to do Roland's second exorcism. But they had to get permission from the Archbishop first, and his condition was that they had to take daily detailed notes of the exorcism. But they also agreed that they would use assistants. So in total, it said that 48 people witnessed Roland's possession and exorcism. At the Alexian Brothers Hospital was that during the day, the boy was calm, but at night, his behavior became strange and aggressive. He'd be prone to violent outbursts one moment and then enter a trance-like state the next. He also had an aversion to sacred objects, and when a vial of holy water was presented to him, it shattered. He also would curse and say the most horrible, vulgar things to the priest about sexual acts and things he shouldn't have known as a 14-year-old. He would also spit on them and try to harm them, even once breaking a priest's nose when he attempted to hold him down during the exorcism. Also on his body, red marks continued to appear, but now they were taking on the shape of pitchforks running all the way from his thighs down to his ankles. Also in his skin, words would get etched like evil and hell, and on his chest an X appeared, which the priests took to be the Roman numeral 10, and they interpreted that as he was possessed by 10 demons. The family could barely take it anymore, and they were at their breaking point, but the priests continued to press on even when Roland's condition deteriorated further. But then, on April 18th, what is described as a miracle took place. It began in the morning when Roland awoke with violent seizures and screamed at the priest that Satan would always be with him. That's when they laid holy relics all across his body, and then that evening, all of the attending priests called upon Saint Michael to expel Satan from Roland's body. They began shouting that Saint Michael would do battle for Roland's body. And then the boy suddenly woke up and he said simply, "He's gone." And all he had was a lingering memory of Saint Michael doing battle with Satan and defeating him. And that's one of the only memories he had of the possession and the exorcism. And he would go on to lead a normal life. He would get married and have children, but he did name his first son Michael after the saint who saved him. And that is the exorcism of Roland Doe.